Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
One Sabbath, Jesus and his disciples were going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. The Pharisee said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And Jesus said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but priests to eat, and he gave some to his companions. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse Jesus. And Jesus said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately conspired with the Herodians against Jesus, how to destroy him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Let us pray. May the words of my mouth, meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in our sight, O Lord, our strength and our salvation. Amen. Please be seated. Who knows the larger term for this sermon? It's a good Episcopal word. It's an ancient Greek word. Starts with E. This service is the Holy Eucharist. Okay, that's exactly right. Eucharist comes from Greek. It's a preposition ou, eu, which means good. Eulogy is a good word spoken about somebody. And charis, which means gift. And so the Eucharist is, and so those two together, good gifts, also come to mean thanksgiving. And all that comes together in the name for the service. It is a service in which we are exceedingly thankful for the good gifts that God has given us, especially the bread and wine of communion, in which Jesus comes to us and makes his presence known in a very real way. Well, this last service, we took that word Eucharist and we played with it a little bit. We made it Foucarist, because we took the music of the Foo Fighters and we made that the hymnody of the service, if you will. We publicize that on social media like we do with all of our services, and that is the most pushback we have ever gotten against any service we've ever done. We've done a number of themed services, but this particular one, the Foucarist, people looked at that and said, "Seriously?" And then a host of other comments, but probably my favorite comment was, "Just about the time you've given up faith on the Roman Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church goes and does something like this and remind you what a bunch of fools they all are." And no small amount of arrogance in that comment. But it was interesting to see that kind of pushback. So, should have we done a Foucarist? Or should we not? And that is I think, a pretty good question. And it is a question, in fact, that I've struggled with. And so I want to talk a little bit more about how we make decisions about the opportunities before us. Because interestingly, when we're making this decision, we have a situation described in the gospel where Jesus is doing something new, something that violates the religious traditions of his day or the religious understandings of his day. He's doing that to reach out to people with God's love, and the number one source of grief he gets from that comes from good religious folks. So it's sort of a fascinating context to consider the question, should we or should we not do a Foucarist? And we're going to use it to think about risk in general. When we have opportunities before us in life, should we take the risk to make the most of those opportunities? Jesus has these opportunities before him here, such as this opportunity to heal a person. Should he take the most of this opportunity? Should he take the risk? And as we look at this, I think we'll learn something about how we measure risk in our own lives. And of course, how we manage risk, how we decide whether to proceed, that's really one of the secrets of life. There is no avoiding risk. To try and avoid risk and do nothing is in itself a risk. So, the first thing we notice about Jesus, or the first thing I notice about Jesus, is that he looks at this situation and he sees the risks that are involved, and when determining whether or not to proceed, part of his decision is will this help me achieve my mission? Is this true to my values? Will this help me become more of the person that I really want to be? And so he looks at the situation, this opportunity to heal. He knows that there's going to be some downsides to it, but he remembers what his mission is, and he makes his mission clear at other portions in Scripture. We all know it very well, that he's come to let people know how much God loves them so that we might do a good job of loving others like God has loved us. And this situation matches that perfectly. So it matches his mission. It matches his values. He wants to be a loving person himself. He wants to perfectly show the world how much God loves him and all of us. And this situation seems like a perfect opportunity to do that. And so he judges that it's worth the risk on that basis. And so as we look at our lives and we look at the opportunities before us, one of the questions we want to ask is, is this opportunity that's before me, is this an occasion to accomplish my life mission? Is this an occasion to become more of the person that I want to be, or if you're a person of faith, that I believe God is calling me to be? Is this risk in keeping with my values? Will this help me become more of who I really want to be? And let's just tease that out a little bit in terms of Sunday mornings. Because every Sunday morning, we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to be in church, and of course, we have an opportunity to do other things. And there is certainly a risk to coming to church, right? The sermon might be absolutely terrible, and it might be just a complete waste of your time, and our time is precious, and who wants to have their time wasted? It might be an opportunity to do some work. You don't do that work. Maybe somebody else uses that time to do work. They get the promotion. You don't. It might be a time the kids can go play in sports or whatever, and if your kids don't play in that sport, then geez, they're not even going to be on the team, so that's sure not worth the risk. So there's a certain amount of risk in coming every Sunday, in coming on a Sunday morning to church. Is it worth that risk? And maybe one of the ways we answer that question, again, I'm just thinking with you, maybe one of the ways we answer that question is, does this help me accomplish my life mission? Does this help me become more of who I want to be, who I believe God is calling me to be? Is this true to my values? And as I think about how I'd answer that, I'm going to answer that sort of in context of my generation. I always think it's better if we criticize our own group rather than other groups. It's better for conservatives to criticize conservatives rather than and conservatives have enough problems that they've got plenty to criticize. It's better for them to criticize themselves rather than liberals criticize them. It's better for liberals to criticize liberals. They've got enough problems to occupy them rather than them, because when you criticize across groups, you don't hear each other. But when we speak within our own groups, then it's a lot easier to see and hear what we're doing. So I'm going to speak to my own group, baby boomers. And I believe there's never been a more destructive or generation that has sold out like any other generation like ours. I mean, I just believe we've sold out in the biggest of ways, and I believe we've been an incredibly destructive force in the life of this world, country, and to our kids, all kinds of ways. And it's really a tragedy because we started out so well. I mean, we started out so well. We started out with the biggest of ideals. You know, we said we weren't going to give the man an inch if it meant compromising. We said we don't care squat about materialism. What we care about is what's right. We're going to live what's right, and so on and so forth. And then, man, I don't know what happened, but we traded all that for big fancy houses, nice fast cars, good trips, nice clothes, all that other sort of stuff. And we've done it in a way that's incredibly destructive to ourselves. All the statistics on boomers are we're not a particularly happy crew. We're a very self-destructive crew, and we self-destruct in a number of ways. We've done it at a great cost to the world, the environment, so on, so forth. And I think, and so if I were a boomer and I was looking at Sunday morning, I would say, what am I going to do with Sunday morning? Well, I can do something that nurtures, whether I believe in God or not. If I believe in God, then that certainly plays in, but whether I believe in God or not, Sunday morning is an opportunity to give myself to something higher, to be reminded about something higher, to be reminded there's something greater than myself. Other than that, I'm just going to always drift to what I am, which is an animal, and what do animals do? We pursue pleasure. We pursue comfort. That's the set point. That's what we're always going to fall back on. That's what our generation does. And part of that is because they stopped coming to church. Because here's this opportunity on a Sunday morning, do we take, there's certainly a risk in it, but if I do this in some way, shape, or form on a consistent basis, I'm going to get an interjection from something higher than myself, something greater than myself. Maybe it's just being part of a community, something larger than myself. And it's not going to let me betray all my ideals and sell myself out like all my brothers and sisters are doing. So just on that basis, you might analyze it entirely differently. And you might want to, maybe you want to down after the last service, somebody said, let's sit down and have lunch. So maybe they want to say I'm right, maybe they want to say, man, you got it all wrong. If you consider, you analyze it your way. But again, recognize Sunday morning is an opportunity. There's a risk inherent in it, and part of that risk is who you want to be, and are you living that life genuinely? No matter what you tell yourself, because we all tell ourselves stories that work for us, are you becoming that person? Or, are we selling out? So that's the first way, and Jesus refuses to sell out. Jesus stays true to who he is, what his mission is going to be, and what he believes God called him to do. So the first way has to do with knowing what success looks like, making sure in the truest and highest and holiest sense of the word, making sure we're moving to that. The second sense of the word, the second way Jesus assesses risk is in counting the cost. And by the way, a person who takes risks without knowing that they're taking them, where that's taking them, without having an idea of where they want to go, that person's reckless. All right? Risk without an assessment of where you're going is recklessness. And you might want to have a reckless person or two in your life. They tend to be a lot of fun, but you got to be careful of them. And in some ways, you got to protect yourself from them. All right, so we come to the second one. The second one, what Jesus does is he doesn't just know what success looks like. He doesn't just know where he's going, but he also looks at the costs. And there's some very real costs here. So the second thing to make in making a good assessment of whether to take a risk, make the most of an opportunity, is what we might say counting the cost. And so Jesus looks at the cost, and he realizes that there are these religious figures, these good religious people, very powerful religious people, the most powerful religious people, and he knows they're watching him. They're just waiting for him to mess up. They want him to do something wrong so that they can criticize him or worse. And so he's got to say, okay, this is going to cost me something. Is it worth doing it? And when he looks at it, he says, here's a person who I can help. Here's a person who can know they're loved. Here's a difference I can make. I don't care what the cost. To me, it's worth it. But he counts the cost, right? A person who doesn't count the cost, who takes risks without counting the cost, without knowing the cost involved, that person isn't just reckless, they're dangerous. You want to protect yourself from those people. You want to keep those folks at arm's length, all right? The person who risks without being aware of the cost that they're incurring and you're incurring with them, that person is dangerous. And so we might think maybe about mission trips as a way to think about this one. I'll give you two examples of what this looks like. First one, mission trips. Again, mission trips are an opportunity, all kinds of opportunities. We're going to Puerto Rico, as you know, 27 people going, biggest international trip we've taken, other than our trips to Belize with the youth group, which were 50 folks. And we have youth trips. There are opportunities. Again, there's risks in going, but there's risks in not going, opportunities that are missed. There's a mission trip right here called Mission Possible for adults. We're right here in this community. We're doing work that this community needs. And if you can't go anywhere else, if you can only participate a day. And so part of looking at it is saying, okay, there's cost to this for sure. There's money costs, there's time costs, and there's opportunity costs. Can I incur those costs? And if I can, and if this is true to my values, true to my mission, then I need to do this. All right, then I need to do this. So, but we need to be aware that there are costs. If I'm not physically able to work for 5 days out in the hot sun, I might not want to go to Puerto Rico, but maybe I'll work for 2 days on Mission Possible here. See, so if we look at the costs, we manage the costs, might not be able to do other things, but it opens other opportunities to us. Another one, and I know I talk about this a lot. Sometimes people say, why do I talk about this a lot? I'd say if you did my job with me for a week, you would know why I talk about this a lot. Because I simply do not think that there's anything that causes more pain and suffering than our culture's abuse of alcohol. And every time I say that, I just look around the room and I see people's heads nod. I mean, and some of them are real young people that are nodding because they've just suffered so much in their own homes and families. And just terrible stories. And so when it comes to alcohol, again, alcohol is an opportunity. There are always costs associated with it. Are you willing to take those costs? Are you willing to take those risks? How are you going to manage them? And so, I think alcohol is a good thing, and I drink on occasion. But you also, some of you will know that I have a very strict policy that I adhere to come hell or high water, and my policy is one and done. And that is just it. And I just do not violate that. So I went to a wedding last night, and at this wedding they had his and her drinks. The hers drinks were Shirley Temples, and I don't really like Shirley Temples. The other one was, I can't remember what it's called, but it was Coke and Captain Morgan. That sounded pretty good to me. So I had one of those, and it was good, and I enjoyed it, and it, and it tasted real good, and it made me relax a little bit. It was, it was great. But after I had the one, I thought that one was really pretty good. And, at certain points that you're waiting for everybody to settle everything down there, and conversation slows, and it's hot, and I'm getting a little, maybe feeling just for a moment, a little bit bored. And I started to think, boy, another drink would sure be good. They're free. I could really, that would help the evening go a little bit faster. It would pass the time. I'll chill out a little bit more, And I just started to go through this whole thing. But then I have to run the risk scenarios. Let's say I have that second one. And when I originally worked this through in the sermon, I was risking in terms of being stopped by a policeman. But I'm going to actually up the ante, because this is a risk. I mean, you have to assess how much of a risk it is. Let's say I'm driving home on unfamiliar roads out in the middle of the countryside where the trees are real close to the road. It's been raining, the roads are wet, and my reaction time is just a little bit slow, and a deer jumps out in front of the car, and I am not able to respond quickly enough, and my wife ends up paralyzed because of it. Maybe a bit far-fetched, but a possibility, right? Am I willing, however small, am I willing to incur that risk? And if I am not, then I have to rule it out from the get-go, and the way I rule it out from the get-go is one and done. This is not even going to be a possibility for me. Let's say I don't hit the deer. Let's say I get stopped by the policeman and I get a DUI. That's going to up our insurance rates, and it's going to affect us financially. That's going to affect my wife's quality of life. Am I willing to do that? It's going to affect the congregation, because it's embarrassing if your priest has a drinking problem. And am I willing to do that to you? No, I am not. And when a father does this, or a mother, and parents, we just need to be honest with ourselves about this. Anything we do gives tacit approval to our kids to do it. So if I get a DUI, no matter how bad it is, it's Dad did it, in some way, shape, or form, is saying, my dad, who I respect and I love, it's okay for me to do it. No, it is not okay. I'm never going to give my kids that permission to do that. So I'm just going to rule that possibility right up front. Not even a possibility. One and done. One and done. Now and bear with me on this. I want to take one brief interlude and speak to our college kids, our men and women, and to parents of college kids, and to parents who have college kids coming up, because I would, and my daughter knows this, before she went to college. In fact, I preached a sermon series on it. But we spoke very clearly about alcohol. You want to think through alcohol, all right? You want to have a policy on alcohol. And I would encourage you either just from the start to say, I'm not going to drink, or to say one and done. Because what we know, and statistics are just so clear on this, is that women who are abused, who are raped, who are all these other things, so often alcohol is going to be involved. That is not to blame women. That is not to say it's women's fault. It's not in way any, but it's just to say this is a high-risk situation. And statistically, if you add alcohol to it, it sends that risk through the roof. Are you willing to take that risk? And if you are not, you eliminate it from the start. When you have a strict policy where you just say, I will not do this. And by the way, talk to some women who have suffered that abuse in college when they've been, and hear what they live with because of that. And a lot of it is turned inwards. And you don't want to go there. And then, but men, you don't get off either. Because as a man, you're the one that's creating those statistics. All right? And you might say up front, I respect women. Sounds good. I believe in consent. I'd never do anything a woman doesn't consent to. You say that when you're a thinking creature. But give yourself 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 beers, you're no longer a thinking creature. And so now you revert back to an animal creature, and an animal makes different decisions than a thinking creature. And you become the abuser. Now, are you willing to even open the door to that possibility? And I would hope you would not be. I would hope you would not be. I did not drink a drop in college, not a drop. And part of that was because I was unwilling to even open the remotest possibility that I would be somebody I couldn't live with myself if I became that person. All right? So this is what it means to count costs. To say, can I really subsume this risk? And if I cannot, don't take it. Make sense? Okay. Then that brings us to the last one. The last one is that Jesus, when nothing's going on, you got to take risks. When the status quo is just so messed up, you got to blow up the status quo. And so Jesus is looking at these religious folks, and the status quo isn't caring for anybody. They're just caring about keeping laws, not about helping humans in need. They're just caring about religious religion, not about really showing love. And this has just gone on for too long, and Jesus, and this is where it says, and I hope you notice this in the text, it says Jesus actually gets angry. And I think we can hear anger in his voice when he looks at the man. He says, is the Sabbath for doing good, or is it for doing harm? And they're just quiet. They don't say. It's for doing good. It's for helping people, showing God's love. And he gets angry, and I think you can hear anger in his voice. He says to the man, stretch out your hand. And I can sort of imagine him taking a moment, he says, just looking at the eyes and the people, do you really want to go here? Do you really want to do this? Okay, stretch out your hand. He stretches out his hand, and it's perfect. We're told that at that moment, all these people were so committed to keeping the Sabbath well, use the Sabbath to begin to consider how they will kill Jesus. Does that sound like good Sabbath keeping to you? And so Jesus sees a situation where, boy, something has to happen, and he makes it happen. Sometimes you're in a relationship, might be a marriage, might be a relationship with a kid, might be a friendship, might be a church relationship, might be a number of things, and that relationship is not satisfactory. People get married with high hopes. And sometimes marriages are just nothing like it. And if nothing's happening in your marriage, then you need to take a risk. You need to have that painful conversation. You just say, you know what? I love you to death, and I've married you for this reason, but I'm miserable in this marriage. And we've got to do things differently. And the person might blow up. The person might call you every name in the book, but at least when they calm down, maybe they'll hear, and there's a possibility of a new future. If you don't do anything, nothing's ever going to happen. If nothing's happening, it's worth the risk. You see somebody going off the rails, a parent, a grandparent sees a kid going off the rails, making bad decisions, a friend, we see a friend making bad decisions. Often we can see exactly where that's going, even when they can't. And we just watch and we watch and we watch. And we can sit back and do nothing. But boy, then it's going to go off the rails. Sometimes when nothing's happening, you need to take a risk. You need to sit down and say, look, I feel like a brother or sister, and I know this is going to be hard to hear, but boy, do I have concerns about that. The person might say, I thought you were my friend, and maybe that friendship ends at that point, at least for a time. There's a risk in that, but if nothing's happening, it's worth the risk. Sometimes, we gotta take risks when what is just simply is not acceptable, and we must call something new into being. One last very quick story, and we're done. When I was growing up, when I was ordained a priest, went to seminary, they didn't teach us anything at all about business or about leadership or anything like that. And so I had not a clue about really how to run a church. And some would argue I still don't. And there'd probably be some truth to that. I mean, probably be some real truth to that. And so in that day, in that congregation, it was a very poor congregation, basically a farming congregation, commercial fishing congregation. The average income in that congregation was about $22,000. Family income was about $22,000. And there was one guy who drove to church in a Mercedes 500 SL. And so I figured that guy knew something about business, and I knew nothing else about him. But I said, you know what, will you sit down with me once a month and just talk to me business? You know, tell me what you see, what I'm doing, and what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, just teach me about that. And he said, sure, I'd love to do that. We sat down for our first lunch, and up to that point, you know, I've been very successful in life, done very well in school, done very well as a priest, you know, growing congregations, adding staff, building buildings, growing budgets, all that sort of stuff. And I just thought of him, say, man, Rob, you're amazing. You know, you're really something. Keep doing what you're doing. He didn't say that to me. What he said to me is he looked at me and he just let off. No small talk, he just let off. He said, I'm going to say something to you that my mentor said to me, and I hope you'll hear it because it's helped me a lot, and I think it'll help you too. And he said, Rob, you play it too safe. He said, what my mentor said to me was, if you're not wrong half the time, if you're not failing half the time, good business sense, right? Good in business sense. If you're not failing half the time, you're not taking enough risks. He said, Rob, all I see you doing is playing it safe to ensure that you continue to be successful. And that's not sustainable. And he was right. So should we have done a Eucharist? I don't know. But it seemed to me it was worth the risk. Amen.